So, hi, everybody, and welcome to the EcoMindset Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about AI and its impact on the environment. And it's a distinct honor to introduce Dr. Shaolei Ren. He's a leading figure in the realm of sustainable computing and artificial intelligence. Dr. Ren serves as an associate professor of electrical and computer engineering at the University of California, Riverside. His interdisciplinary research focuses on making AI systems more environmentally and socially responsible, with a particular emphasis on their water and carbon footprints. Dr. Ren's groundbreaking work has been featured in several esteemed publications, notably his article titled The Uneven Distribution of AI's Environmental Impacts, co-authored with Adam Weirman, and it was published by the Harvard Business Review. His research has also been instrumental in informing global policies and ethical guidelines. His work is featured in the United Nations World Water Development Report of 2024, as well as the United Nations Digital Economy Report of 2024. His insights have also been sought out by various media outlets. He's discussed environmental implications of AI on platforms like NPR's Living Earth and VPM News, shedding light on the significant water consumption associated with AI technologies. Join me in welcoming Dr. Shaolei Ren, who will share his invaluable perspectives on environmental impacts of AI and its water usage. It's great to have you with us today, Doctor. I was wondering, for our audience who maybe doesn't know that much about AI's impacts on the environment, can you explain to us how exactly AI uses water?
Sure. Let's start with how AI uses energy, right? So AI is a type of data center workloads. Right now, most of the large AI models are still being trained and hosted in data centers. So they require a huge amount of GPU resources and servers. And this equipment, this hardware, when they're running, they will be consuming a huge amount of energy. And this energy will be turned into heat. And of course, we just have to get rid of the heat to prevent overheating. And to move the heat from the servers to the outside environment, there are typically two stages. The first stage is to move the heat from the server to the facility or to a heat exchanger. And this is called server level cooling. And typically people use air or use liquid, like immersion cooling, basically putting the servers into some special liquid, or they will use some direct-to-chip cooling using some copper tubes to put some liquid circulating inside the tube and into the servers. But this stage loses no water at all. So there should be no water leak, and that unless there is there should be no water consumption or water loss unless there's a leak. Even though there's a leak, they're not using water. They're using some special type of liquids. The second stage is to further move the heat from the data center facility to the outside environment. And the most commonly used approaches are cooling towers and also outside air cooling with the water evaporation assistance. So if you're using cooling tower, essentially you're just evaporating water 24/7 through the cooling tower to get rid of the heat. And if you're using water evaporation assistance, that means you're just directly blowing the cold outside air to take away the heat. But then when the air is really hot, let's say during the summer times, you're going to use this water evaporation to pre-cool the air for taking away the heat. So these are the two main approaches that data center directly consume water. And by consumption, what we mean is the water gets evaporated. So it's very different from water withdrawal. Like in a household setting, we use a lot of water, but that water is considered water withdrawal. And actually, only about 10% of the household water withdrawal is consumed in the sense that it doesn't directly go back to the sewage system. But for data centers, typically, if you look at those large companies' ESG report, they will be evaporating about 80% of the water they withdraw from the water supply. So that's a huge difference.
Yeah, very interesting. I know that there's some places that have managed to utilize some of the waste heat by using it to heat buildings and stuff like that. But as you mentioned, there's always a warm season, right? So is there any way that the heat energy can be recuperated and put to work in warmer climates or at warmer parts of the year?
So I should mention that if you're using this waste heat recovery systems, or recycling the waste heat from the servers, actually you don't need to have the cooling towers or water evaporation assistance. So if you use the water waste heat recovery, it's mostly used in Europe and some parts of Asian countries where the population density is high. But in the US, as far as I know, only a few very small number of experimental data centers are using this type of a system just for demo. It's not really widely used in the US because where we build data centers are typically not the place where people live. So there are some challenges of using standard or traditional data center waste heat because of the low temperature. Heat is considered low grade heat. The utilization rate is not really high, but right now, as we're moving into the AI servers, we have higher power density and the waste heat temperature tends to be higher than before. So this sort of is easier to utilize compared to the traditional data center heat. So that's a great thing for waste heat recovery systems. But I think as during the Olympic Games in Paris last year, some data centers are using this waste heat to warm up the swimming pools, and we've seen some increasing application, especially in Europe.
Yeah. A little symbolic, I guess, for the moment, right?
At this point, yes.
Yeah. And in Quebec, actually, there was a project on the south shore of Quebec City that planned to utilize the waste heat from a data center. The data center is open, but we haven't heard more about the utilization of the waste heat. You know, with what you're saying about how if the data centers are close to the population centers and people can more easily utilize the heat in the cold season, what's the impact of having those centers, let's say, within cities during the warm parts of the year? There'll be excess heat, I imagine, coming off of them?
Well, they can still use the heat. For example, they can use the heat for the water, for the cold and hot water system in the building. Yeah, they can still utilize the heat, but it's probably not as effective as during the winter time because the demand is lower.
Right. Very interesting. And I know that over the past few weeks, there's been the emergence of this alternative AI company, DeepSeek. They've claimed that they developed it with very small amounts of money and that it's more energy efficient than ChatGPT and the other mostly American, chatbot models. What do you think about this? Is there a way to really, crack through this? Is it that the first generation of AI is going to be very wasteful and then it'll get better as time goes on?
It's actually not a fair comparison when we say Llama uses this much resource and DeepSeek just uses 1/10 of the resources used by Llama for training, because this DeepSeek model is built upon some of the existing models. So they are using some technique called knowledge distillation. So essentially, they are not, instead of training the model from scratch, they utilize the existing models and do some knowledge extraction from the existing models. So just like you have a teacher already, and you don't have to learn from everything on your own, the teacher will teach you the knowledge. Then it's, of course, the learning curve will be shortened and it takes a lot less resource to train the model. So this is a training stage. And they say they spend like a few $100 million and compared to billions of dollars for training the model. That's because they're not doing the things from scratch. But in terms of the inference, because their model size is smaller, and although they're using mixture of experts, so essentially the total model size is huge, but each time they only activate I think it's 30 something billion number of parameters. And because of the smaller model size activated during the inference time, they tend to consume less energy than those larger models. But if you look at the same model size, because Llama has different model sizes, a smaller one is similar to the DeepSeek model. So if you look at the same model size, I would say their resource consumption for inference are sort of similar, not on different orders.
Right. And so some of this energy that's being consumed, you're saying that a lot of it is for the training of the models?
For training, it's sort of one time. Of course, you can do some fine tuning afterwards. But if you talk about the initial training, it's just one time. And once you train it, you can also generate some smaller models using, say, knowledge distillation, or you can fine tune the model to customize the model usage for your own purposes. Actually, if you look at Meta's Llama model, they have the large model. When they produce the smaller model, they are also using knowledge distillation, which is the same technique used by DeepSeek. And if you look at the model cars released by Meta, their smaller model consume a training, even for the training part, it uses much, much less resource compared to training the large model. because a large model is just training everything from scratch. And for the smaller model, you can just build on top of the large model and doing this knowledge distillation based training.
Interesting, interesting. I guess we can expect some gains going forward. It's kind of like when you look at the efficiency of lighting, for example, like the, amount of watts to light a space has come way down over the years, but a lot of people say that it didn't really reduce the energy consumption because people just tend to light bigger areas.
Yeah, that's called Javan's paradox. Essentially, you improve the efficiency, then the demand will also be increasing even further. And overall, the demand is the total energy consumption, resource consumption will be even higher than.
Right. So I guess we can expect some of that going forward as well, right? As more and more people take up the use of AI and more applications. So we're kind of tied to this expansion in computing power and...
Yeah, to a large extent. But I think the efficiency improvement is still a great thing because now it means we're able to do more for less. And we don't have to increase the resource consumption at the same pace as before because the efficiency gets a lot better than before.
Yeah, interesting. Do you know if there's been, because obviously there's a role for regulation when it comes to energy policy and that kind of thing. Are there any jurisdictions that have brought in regulations, for example, to force the data centers to recuperate waste heat? Is there any place that's leading on that front?
I think in Europe, they have some laws. It's a EU-wide directive. I think it's binding for every member state to comply with. So that law requires the member state to have some national laws to essentially requiring the data center to report their energy, their water, their carbon. And for the waste heat part, I guess it's not mandatory, but it's definitely. If you have this waste recovery system, you could have some preferential treatment, like get a better deal, better tax rates, or something like that.
Yeah.
In the U.S., there was a Senate bill proposed to develop some voluntary reporting framework for AI data centers in terms of their energy and water and the carbon. But I guess that bill didn't really move along. Probably just pending or it has been stalled. And in California, there are some ongoing bills just proposed last month, actually. So several bills are targeting this data center energy, water, and land use. But whether these bills will pass or not, that's it's up in the air.
Yeah. And I guess as AI has become so popular over the last few years, have you seen an increased interest in your work researching how AI can impact the environment?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of interest from the different sectors, from the media, from the policymakers and legislators, and also from academic research communities. I think in the long run, this efficiency and sustainability of AI computing will be growing.
Yeah. And out of the AI models that are available to the public now, is there any particular company that is very good or very bad for the environment, or are they all very similar?
I think they usually report their data center wide energy, water, and carbon, but to my knowledge, no company really breaks down their numbers for each individual models. And if you look at their model cards, some of them report the GPU hours. Like if you look at Meta's model, yeah, we can see the GPU hours used for training, but we have no information about the inference because the inference it just depends on the individual system. It can be deployed on a variety of hardware. So that in general, I would say Meta is probably doing a better job than some of their competitors in terms of reporting and transparency. For example, if you look at water consumption, most of the other companies just say we consume this much water over the whole year for all of our data centers. But Meta not only reports each individual location's water consumption, and also reports the scope 2 water consumption associated with the electricity generation. So that's really a rare move among the data center industry.
Interesting. And I know that President Trump has made some big investments in artificial intelligence. Are you a little bit skeptical that they'll overlook the environmental aspect, that some of those investments will not go towards energy efficiency or use of heat?
Biden issued a new executive order about advancing the U.S. AI data center infrastructure. And that executive order, I think even as of now, is still alive. So if you look at that executive order, it includes some languages about the environmental, including water, including clean energy. And also it mentions the public health aspect, like it wants to prioritize the data center locations where the air quality is not following the national standard and where the cancer rate is not higher than the national average. So I think that executive order has something about the environmental part and health part. And it's still alive.
Yeah. That was something that Biden, I think, signed right in his final days in office. Was it one of the first times that the public health impact of AI was considered in such a important document?
To my knowledge, that's the first time somehow there's a recognition about the connection between data centers and the public health impact, especially the cancer rates, which was singled out in that document. So I've never seen although we know AI data center uses the backup generators and this testing and maintenance backup generators can release a huge amount of nitrogen oxides that can be harmful for people's health. And we know that, but it's not really recognized in this type of official document or government report. So I think, to my knowledge, it is the first time that we see this connection.
Okay. Well, it's good that there's some progress being made. Hopefully it doesn't all get erased by the new administration. But I guess we have to hope for the best. Some people, like I use AI a little bit. I find that it's a good research tool. I think it's improved a lot over the past couple of years since it came out. Very good for summarizing stuff, for getting to the bottom of some information hidden in long text and that kind of thing. When I mention the practicalities of AI to some of my colleagues in the environmental movement, they are really shying away from it. They really do not see AI as something positive. Personally, I do think that it is something positive, and some people are boycotting it because of the environmental impact. I'd be interested to get your perspective on that.
Well, I think this is a great tool. Like you said, it can help you do a lot of great things like writing email or checking for grammar mistakes or a lot of great stuff. And even for discovering new science. And I think it has a lot of benefits. The environmental part is one of the externalities or negative externalities that we have to be aware of. But it doesn't mean we should stop using AI just because it has environmental impacts, because everything has environmental impacts. The cars, the airplanes. So if we are aware of it, and we can make a more comprehensive cost benefit analysis, and then let's make a decision. If it's a good usage, I think the benefits would outweigh the negative part.
Yeah. And I'd be interested in getting your perspective also on some environmental uses of the technology. I'll give you an example. This winter, I was interested in going out and walking on a frozen lake up here in Quebec. And through ChatGPT, I managed to get it to produce me a table that would predict the ice depth on the lake for each day in the year going forward based on average temperature data that it was able to access on its own without me feeding it in there. So it was pretty interesting to see that I didn't go and actually measure the ice, but it seemed about on par with the ice thickness that we usually get on this lake. I was wondering what other applications that you've seen where AI can, maybe in a more useful way than just predicting the ice in this sense, so somebody can walk on a lake. But what are the ways that AI can be used to make our society more environmentally friendly beyond its own energy consumption and water use?
Sure. So I think the example that you mentioned is a great example for personal usage. And also we can use AI to develop better algorithm to manage the renewables, because renewable is very intermittent and it's hard to integrate them into the power grid system. And there is a huge amount of curtailment events. Essentially that we have renewables, but we're not able to integrate it into the grid because of the randomness and the mismatch between the demand and supply. So estimating or predicting the future demand and the availability of solar. It's one of the areas a lot of people are working on. And also, if you look at Google, I think Google has a solar installation project. Essentially, they are using AI image models to determine what is the optimal solar panel that it should install on each household's rooftop. So, and what else? We can also use AI to predict the weather to help us plan that's also part of the power system demand prediction. And in my research, I also use sometimes I use AI to like help me find out their air dispersion model, because we're trying to estimate where the pollutant will go after the source. So I think AI is very useful in those aspects. And
Yeah.
if you try to estimate the public health impact coming from the fossil fuel usage, you need to have the real-time weather condition. And if you just rely on traditional model, that's really computationally intensive. But using AI models can be extremely fast.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I know that also in terms of reducing pesticides, that there's some agricultural equipment now that is using AI to identify weeds, for example, and they'll go and mechanically remove the weed rather than spraying the whole field with pesticides. I find that is something that's very interesting, right? Because we're spraying pesticides on all of these fields everywhere, and with a bit of technology, I think it can go a long way. Even with the drone technology now, where they'll spray only on infected parts of the field a little bit more precisely. It's interesting how AI can cut down on waste of a lot of different things. I went to San Francisco last fall and late summer, and I got to ride in one of the Waymo cars, right? So for people who are not familiar with that, it's the Google self-driving car project that's now deployed in San Francisco and other cities. And one thing I found very interesting about that was that the vehicles are very highly equipped, right, with all kinds of sensors. I'm sure they're over $1 million each. But we've got other cars like the Teslas that are operating on roadways only using the camera-based AI system. I know this may be beyond the environmental aspects of AI, but it seems to me that by cutting corners and relying only on cameras and not having all the sensors that the Waymo has, including LiDAR and radar, are we not taking a huge risk with this? I know there's been some accidents. Should we not be banning the camera-based self-driving systems?
Well, at first, I'm not expert on autonomous driving, so I can't really speak as an expert for those topics. But based on my personal knowledge, I think, yeah, has been some safety concerns with using camera only for this autonomous end-to-end based autonomous driving. If this image-based system I think the concern is mainly, as you said, is a safety risk. It might if you're driving in the dark during the night, the camera-based system could be easily more vulnerable than the lidar-based system. So
yeah.
I think I have some friends who work in this autonomous driving, but I think they are mostly working on the mixture of both types of systems, not really just relying on image-based camera.
And, with respect to self-driving, I'd like to get your point of view on the environmental aspect of that, because, on the one hand, people could abandon their personal private vehicles and have these autonomous vehicles that would operate kind of like taxis. So people wouldn't have each their own vehicle. It might cut down on the number of kilometers traveled, and it's easier for people to carpool also if it's a self-driving car that comes and picks them up. But it seems to me also that, on the other hand, if people get their own self-driving vehicle, well, one of the reasons, let's say, not to take a 2-hour drive somewhere on the weekend and come back is the fact that you have to be sitting behind the steering wheel, right? So if everybody has these self-driving vehicles, eventually, so decades in the future, they might actually drive more kilometers, right? Have you looked into this at all?
No, not yet. I think, again, my view is whenever we make a decision, we look at the benefit. We also look at the cost. And it turns out the environmental aspect is just one part of the cost, and we need to have a pricing mechanism. Not really literally pricing, but it's like a way to evaluate the actual impact, to quantify the impact. I mean, using the carbon emission, it's helpful, but sometimes it's not sufficient, because what does 1 kilogram of carbon emission mean? So we need to have we need to have a better understanding of the impact, quantitative impacts in terms of the climate.
Yeah.
Energy cost, that's something it's directly measurable. It's tangible. It's in terms of the dollar cost. But carbon is not. It's just it's a weight, and we need. I think if we have those sort of metrics, we can make a decision more easily and more objectively instead of depending on the preferences.
Yeah. So maybe a little bit hard to quantify, but would you say in general that the rise of AI is a positive or a negative for the environment?
Well, I think at this point, although I don't have a way to quantify the carbon impact, I think it's a positive thing even now. Before, I mean, maybe last year, I was thinking this environmental impact would be higher in the short term than the benefits. But now, I think it's the overall benefit is still high. Is the reason is if you look at the energy cost, and that's something that we can measure. I think people that tend to agree that the benefits is higher than the energy cost. If if at least I believe so. And then let's look at the public health impact, which is measurable in terms of the dollar cost. And our study shows that the health impact is roughly in the US, roughly between 50 and 70% of the energy bill of the energy cost for the AI model.
Okay.
And carbon, although as I said, it's the pricing for carbon emission is really it varies a lot depending on the type of markets, whether it's a compliance markets or voluntary markets, or if you look at there's another term called social cost of carbon, but it varies very widely depending on the administrations. In the last few administrations, we saw the price ranging from $1 per ton to more than $200 per ton. But in any case, even though you look at the higher end of the pricing for carbon, I think the carbon pricing in the US is still lower than the energy cost. So let's double the energy cost as a simple measure for the environmental part. I think yeah, at least the benefit seems to be much higher than the energy bill. And so even though you double the energy bill, then the benefit, I think it's still positive.
Even if there was a carbon tax which doubled the cost of energy, people would still would be willing to pay for the service, I guess.
Right. But again, whether this carbon pricing is accurate or not, that's up to debate. It's not.
Yeah.
If we're just taking the current pricing as is, then that's the result.
Yeah. Though the Green Party of Quebec was calling for a $200 per ton carbon tax. So it's a lot more significant than what we see in the Canada and United States at the moment.
It's depending, again, we are talking about the cost part, but the benefit part, depending on the usage. If you're using AI for just drawing a cartoon, well, the benefit might be really limited, at least for the society. And if you're generating some malicious information, the benefit could be even negative. So the cost part, that's something we have a rough estimate, but for the benefit part is depending on the usage. So not every AI model will have a positive impact, but some.
Right. And for people who are watching, like, how do you quantify the amount of energy, let's say, for like a single ChatGPT response of 500 words, let's say?
500 words, according to Microsoft's study, is actually a long response for conversational AI language models. So this energy consumption, if you're talking about the commercial systems, because they have to return the responses to the user very quickly, and they need to over-provision their system. And overall, for those commercial systems, I would say the energy consumption is roughly 10 to 20 watt hour. So that's
that's quite a bit.
Just to give you some context, 20 watt hour is roughly the amount of energy you put into your battery for your iPhone.
For the entire phone, right?
Yeah,
20, which will last hours. Well, that's actually quite a bit of electricity when you put it in that kind of perspective.
Yeah, in some sense. Or basically, if you write 10 responses, that's the amount of energy can drive a Tesla Model 3 for about 1 mile.
Wow, interesting. Yeah. And does it depend on what you ask it? Because I would assume that some things are easier to go and fetch than others.
Yeah. Depends on because the language model, it works in two phases, the prompt phase and the token phase. The prompt phase is basically how complex your input is to the model. If you're asking and putting a lot of information as the prompt, then the prompt phase can use a lot more energy than otherwise. And the token phase is basically how long the responses are. And again, that depends on the length and also depends on the complexity of the
right. So if you ask it, ChatGPT, let's say, what's the weather for the next week and by given city, is that a lot more energy than going to Google and typing in what's the weather for that city?
In general, but by the way, both systems are closed systems. We don't have the official disclosure about the resource consumption. But yes, in general, I think this generative model will be consuming more energy than
A bit more,
web
yeah.
search.
Interesting. What do you think is the greatest potential for AI in terms of helping the environment and fighting climate change going forward?
Well, I think AI, the most immediate and the great potential of AI, using AI to deal with the climate change, is addressing its own problem. So addressing the data center energy and climate problem. We've seen a lot of, even 10 years ago, there was a very simple study coming from Google about using AI to predict the power usage effectiveness, which is a key metric for data center energy efficiency. And in the last over the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of studies on using AI to improve the cooling system, improve the data center scheduling. So I think that's the first thing to do by using AI to just improve the data center efficiency on its own.
Yeah. Okay. And just pivoting from the environmental to some ethical issues, if that's okay with you. They say that these models are not supposed to do things like generate hate speech, right? But on ChatGPT, I did an experiment and I managed to get it to generate hate speech by telling it, write me a satirical text about such and such a situation, And after, it was a little bit reluctant, but after back and forth a few times, it came out with a speech about how a certain group of people should be rounded up and put into concentration camps and all this kind of thing. And it was all like as if it was joking, right? But if you remove the word joke, like it was pretty real. It was frightening, actually.
Yeah.
What kind of regulations are there in place for this kind of thing? And why is it that it's so easy to get around?
Well, because the AI model is, when they train the model, it looks at all the data and probably some of the bad data, just part of the training data set. And it's really hard to get rid of all those things, all those bad things from the training data set. This, by the way, the way that we play around the ChatGPT to make it generate some hatred messages, this is called a jailbreak. Essentially, we're trying to doing some adversarial attacks for the model. So in terms of regulation, during the Biden administration, there was an executive order about safeguarding the AI by using watermark and some other technique to make sure this malicious content is not generated easily. But I think that order seems to have been revoked. I think the regulation, generally, we should expect fewer regulation for AI in the next years.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky because, with all the sophistication in the language model, it could come up with some hate speech that would like resonate with a lot of people, right? That could really catch on and they could, kind of improve hate speech to make it sound more appealing to people. So I worry a lot about that. I think some people also are worried about, like, we have artificial intelligence. What about artificial consciousness? The models can think a little bit, but they're not conscious yet.
No, I think we haven't addressed the intelligence yet. So for the consciousness, I think that's even far-fetching.
Yeah. How far do you think something like that is off?
To be honest, I never thought about this issue, because I don't really think that we're having intelligence. It is not artificial. Well, it is artificial, but not real intelligence yet. The way that we develop the AI now is fundamentally still based on the training statistical performances. It's not really the same way that human brains work.
Right. It's more mathematical and...
Yeah. They're building up upon this universal approximation theorem.
Right.
And our brain doesn't work in this way. Before this theorem, our brain was able to work like for thousands of years.
Yeah. So what's the fundamental difference between the human intelligence and artificial intelligence then?
I can't really explain the difference very well because I'm not a neuroscientist. I think if you look at the current neural network, they're all based on this like matrix multiplication plus some activation. That's of course there are more advanced architecture like transformer, but yeah, essentially it's based on some matrix multiplication, and they call it a neuron. Except for it's called neuron, it has nothing to do with our real neuron in our brain.
Right.
Our brain just works in a different way. It's not like this matrix multiplication.
Right.
We
Okay.
recognize objects very easily. We don't have to go through those layers of multiplication.
Right. Interesting. So there's no chance for the short-term future that the machines will take over, develop consciousness, and
I'm not worried about that.
yeah. Okay. Perfect. Listen, it's been excellent talking to you. I think you've shared some very interesting insights about the environmental impact of AI and where we're going with all this. I'm going to continue to follow your work. Thanks for coming on the Eco Mindset, and look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.